Hi y'all, welcome back to my shop, Mike Peace Woodturning. In a recent video I talked about the pros and cons of two different kinds of drill chucks, the keyless and the keyed. Today we're going to talk about tips and tricks for drilling various projects on the wood lathe. And we're talking about a lot more than just using the Jacobs chucks, so keep on watching. The first drilling technique I want to talk about is the one that most people probably think about, and that's where you have the drill chuck in the tailstock drilling with the piece being turned. First thing we want to do, before we do anything else, make sure we got this faced off. I've already done that. Then it's important that you create a little dimple here. Sometimes you can manage that when you're facing this off with, say, a spindle gouge, but just easing this in. You just want to make sure you don't have a little cone in the bottom, and that tends to be somewhat of a challenge on this. So what I like to do is I like to reach for a skew, because this is one of the easiest ways to do this. On its side, take the long point and just ease it in there, and that'll give you a nice centering point. Well, I've still got a little piece there. Let's just get rid of, there we go. Right on center. That'll make it a whole lot easier to center the drill bit. So the first thing we're going to do is, rather than put the Jacobs chuck inside the tailstock and then insert the drill bit, I find it's easier and more effective if I do this off the lathe like this. That way I can look down it and make sure that it's truly centered, because it's easy to get it off a little bit. You don't notice it until you start drilling and you got a walled out hole. So we're going to bring up the tailstock a little bit. Kind of smack it in there so it joins good. Get this out of the way. We want to turn at an appropriate speed. I'll have a speed chart a little bit later. Just ease it in, always keeping your hand on the chuck, and just let it find the center. Go slow. Just let it find the center, and then you can speed up a little bit. You also want to make sure you retract regularly. Clear out the chips. A little brass brush works great for that. Actually, even a toothbrush can sometimes do it. Sometimes that resin will make it stick a little bit. What I like to do is, especially when the drill bit is kind of warm after retracting it the first time, rub a little paraffin on it. That'll make it a little bit smoother going in and out. The reason you want to have your hand on here, because every now and then, if you're not careful, this winds up getting embedded and engaged. It generates heat. Heat creates steam if it's green wood, and it'll just swell up and lock it. And if you start retracting it without having your hand on it, it's possible that this will get embedded. This will actually pull out of your tailstock. Then it'll start whipping around. This happened to a member of my woodturning club, and he wound up having to get several stitches on his forearm as this thing was whipping around and beating on him. So here's how I drill a longer tool handle. I cut this block of wood with a hole in it, kind of acting as steady rest, clamped it onto my box tool rest, and it swiveled freely and it supports it, and then I just slowly ease the tailstock into it and crank it in and drill that hole. Now, for some drilling operations, it makes more sense to actually put the drill in the headstock. This is more appropriate to a horizontal drilling machine. Kind of think of your drill press on its side. I illustrate that in this little clip I showed you in that previous video on drilling small holes in the top of angel ornaments with a very tiny bit. But I think a more practical example, or one that you're more likely to run into, is this one. Now, we saw earlier it's easy enough to drill with this in the tailstock in drilling a handle, but however that doesn't work if you've got a Midi lathe, because maybe there's not enough room. Let me show you. Alright, let's say you got a Midi lathe. Maybe you got a 16-inch bed like this little Laguna 1216, or maybe you've got a 20-inch bed, but you don't have an extension. You can see what the challenges we're going to have if we tried to turn that tool handle and drill it with the tool blank in the chuck, even if we use the shorter keyed chuck rather than the keyless chuck we talked about earlier, where the keyed chuck is a little bit shorter, and even if we have a stubby arbor, a stubby Morse 2, this is a standard, but even if it's a little shorter, you can see there's no way we're going to be able to turn something like this. You might be able to turn a handle perhaps this size and drill a hole if we start back off here a little bit. Even that, you can see we're going to have a almost have a challenge. So how do we drill it with a Midi lathe? I'll show you. Now the constraint you can see here is you can't drive it directly down the middle using the tailstock. So that's why we had that starter hole, because we're going to take the tailstock off, and we've got that starter hole hopefully to give us enough depth to be able to hold this straight. Now let me go ahead and mark 2 inches on here with tape. So we're going to turn that speed to somewhere maybe between 700 and 800. We're going to line this up as close as we can to being straight. Another common drilling technique, I might be getting ahead of myself, but while I got this block of wood here, and that's actually, you can actually drill using your spindle gouge, and this is really effective when you're doing something small like perhaps a birdhouse ornament or even a box. So with this almost parallel, actually you're going to start the entry cut with that almost perpendicular in there. Once you get that started, then you can just ease it around. And I'm facing it maybe 10 o'clock, but I didn't get it centered, so it's wallowing offside. Just plunge it straight in. You can see I've got it that deep without any effort at all. Now, if you're a novice wood turner and you're making a box, you may think it's easier or ask the question, why wouldn't you just hollow out the box with a Forstner bit? Well, there's several reasons. Number one, it's very slow. You need to buy the extra bit and keep it sharp. It has a tendency to turn the wood. It's going to have a little divot at the bottom, and it's going to have very square shoulders at the bottom, which is not necessarily a good design feature for a box where you're going to reach into it. You want a rounded bottom. And especially when you consider comparing it to the alternatives, the way we traditionally do it, where it's so fast and easy to hollow with a spindle gouge, and it just does not take much time at all. To hollow out a box. So for this kind of drilling, I find the easiest way is to put a drill bit in a handle. Doesn't even need a ferrule because it's not going to get any lateral pressure on it. I use 2 sizes. I use a 9/64 because I typically use a 1/8 inch bead, and a 1/8 inch bead won't go through a 1/8 inch hole. The second, then I use a larger one for the bottom. I've got a video on turning fan poles if you're interested, but let me just show you how fast and simple this is. First thing, we're going to start with a large hole. Now I like to brace myself on the tool rest, and drilling at a comfortable speed of no more than about 1,000. I'm just going to get that in that dimple and just plunge it in just a little ways. And I've actually got some little marks scored on here with a file or a Dremel whiz wheel. Then, since it leaves a little dimple at the bottom, now I'm going to switch to my smaller 9/64 and just feel my way to the bottom until I get to the bottom, till I get into that little centering hole, and then go in. Now frequently your drill bits are not long enough to go all the way through, but not a problem. All I've got to do is reverse this. And when you reverse it end over end, so it'll stay in pretty much the same orientation. And this technique, drilling from both sides, is very effective for making sure your hole's generally going to match. and there it goes. So I frequently use this hand drill bit. This is a 1/4 inch for centering holes. It works. It works great for a number of things. It does not work as well. It works where tremendous accuracy is not needed. It does not work as well on, for example, twig pots, where a little bit of difference will show up on the size of the neck. So you don't want to use this where extreme accuracy is necessary. Now, drilling from both ends for longer holes, especially like pepper mills or any hole longer than the drill bit, is a great technique, and generally it will center in the middle as shown here in this procedure for drilling pepper mills. So I'm using a Forstner bit to drill a couple of larger bore holes in the bottom, and then I'm going to drill from each end using this high-speed steel #2 Morse taper, and I drill in from one end, and I drill about halfway down, and then when I get halfway down I pull it out and reverse it and drill from the other end until it clears. And this way it gives me a very hole that's drilled. I've got to clear the chips, otherwise they can smoke and seize up on you. So here I'm turning it around and coming in from the other end. And I take a little bit of a divot out in the middle before I drill that second hole, and just slowly proceed. I've got my speed down to no more than about 500 for this large bit. Another example of drilling from both ends of the blank is drilling this stick pin blank for his refrigerator magnet stick pins. Now, in some instances, you don't need to drill long holes if you can create a channel, such as when I did this lamp. If you turn a lot of lamps and you're starting with a green blank, well, then you've got to come up with a little different technique. But if you're doing glue ups, it's easier to do a channel and not have to do drilling that hole. Generally, when I'm drilling depth holes for smaller pieces like boxes or maybe a small hollow form, I prefer to use this 1/4 inch hand drill bit because it's fast, it's easier. Now, using a depth drill, we're going to go ahead and drill a center hole. That's the starter hole. Move the tailstock out of the way. And I can tell I need to stop right about near the end of the flute. I find putting a handle, just a round dowel with a hole all the way through, makes it a little easier for you to stabilize this whichever way you do it to drill that hole, and it reduces the danger from some of those that have very sharp flutes that are fairly close, because it gives your hand a safe place to be. Let me show you an interesting technique. It may not be suitable for everybody, but it may work out if you don't have a drill press, you don't have room for a drill press. It's called a crotch pocket. Basically, it's a Woodturning Morse taper with a little V slot in it, and you could use it, for example, for turning or for drilling round items like holes on, if you're making a stool or something. Certainly one use if you were on the road demonstrating how to make a stool and you don't have access to a drill press, this could work out real well. You could actually drill other items if you use a larger flat plate back here. You could drill on a board. If you missed my videos on the drill chucks, you can click on that here. I really appreciate any comments y'all leave. Some of y'all got more of an insight in any particular item I talk about in one of these videos than I do, so I welcome your comments and your questions. Y'all stay safe. Come on back here.